What's going on, everybody? Thank you so much for coming back to another video. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about Wes Craven's A New Nightmare. What's going on, everybody? Thank you so much for having me. What's going on, everybody? What's going on, everybody? Thank you so much for having me in another... Wow. What's going on, everybody? Thank you so much for coming back to another video. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about Wes Craven... What's going on, everybody? Thank you so much for What is wrong with me? What's going on, everybody? Thank you so much for coming back to another video. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Interpreting the Stars is here once again for another collab review. Big thanks to him for being here in this video. He actually commented on one of my videos earlier in the franchise once I started doing the Nightmare on Elm Street films and said that he wanted to maybe do this one or do the remake. So I knew I wanted to reach out to him to do New Nightmare with me so I can hear his thoughts on it. So yeah, let's go ahead and get right into my thoughts. We're going to hear from David in just a little bit, but a big thanks to him for being here in this video. New Nightmare. What a breath of fresh air after some stinkers in the franchise. It's been no secret that the 4th, 5th, and 6th film in the franchise just slowly got worse and worse. Not even slowly. They just completely dive-bombed into being worse and worse with each installment. Now, each installment, maybe not so much the 6th one, but 4 and 5 at least have some redeeming qualities, whereas the 6th one is just bad. It's just a bad movie in and of itself. Even Robert Englund really couldn't save that film for me. So I was really excited to watch this movie again because I remember it being the more meta approach to it, but there was a lot about the film that I didn't really remember. So being able to rewatch it today, it was nice to be able to kind of see these new things that I didn't remember from the first time I watched it because I had only seen this movie once. And this was Wes Craven's kind of return to the franchise. Not kind of, this was his return to the franchise, and I'll get into that in just one moment. But it was also his, kind of first steps into what he would end up doing with Scream, with a very meta approach to a slasher film. So like I mentioned, this was his return to the franchise, and he had directed and written the first one, and then he, wasn't involved in the second one. I think it's, very, very well known that he kind of sold the rights to the franchise. He just did the one movie, and then the studio was making more of the sequels. He had a little bit of involvement in the third film, but beyond that, he had no involvement, and he's been pretty vocal about the fact that he doesn't really like where they took the franchise overall. And I can't blame him, honestly. It's definitely has no real path for most of the time, and compared to what was really set up with that first film, a lot of them just don't even hold a candle. I really do enjoy the third one, and I like the second one, and this one, without a doubt, is the next one in the franchise that was a huge breath of fresh air that really revitalized the franchise. So this movie takes place in the real world. Our main character in the film is Heather Langenkamp, the actress herself, playing herself, and Freddy Krueger and the Nightmare on Elm Street films exist in this world. It's just as if Freddy Krueger was the big pop culture icon that he is, the huge horror icon that he is. Robert Englund is in this film as well as himself. Wes Craven is in this film as himself. John Saxon is in this film as himself. Rest in peace, John Saxon. And yeah, I really enjoy the approach of this film right out of the gate. You have these actors playing themselves in the real world. They've already filmed these movies, and the franchise has already gone on to be this huge success. Freddy is this huge pop culture icon. And while Wes Craven is working on a new film, Freddy Krueger, or the entity of Freddy Krueger, is kind of coming into the real world and is now becoming a new threat for them. So weird stuff starts to happen. And we find Heather Langenkamp kind of having to embody the character of Nancy once more in order for her to take out Freddy. Now that's the basic premise of this film, and what I can really say as far as my general thoughts is I think for the most part this movie really works. It's a very clever installment into the franchise that has some great cinematography, far better performances than the last few, and again, it was just a breath of fresh air by the time I got here. This is a movie that is well written for the most part, minus some elements that are kind of lacking in logic and some silly, goofy moments. But compared to the things I had just seen before this, because I think I watched the 6th movie the same day that I watched the 7th movie, it was night and day. I mean, watching that 6th movie and then being able to watch this, it's just like I was eating crap before and now I'm eating like a beautiful steak. This is an absolutely solid film in the franchise that makes Freddy creepy again. Now, before I continue my thoughts on this, let's go ahead and hear what David had to say about this one.
here's the review.
I'm back on Anthony's channel once again to talk about Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Funny thing, way back when Anthony started to do these Nightmare on Elm Street films, I believe I commented on one of them. I'm not entirely sure if it was YouTube or Twitter, but what I said was I'd be down to watch this with him, New Nightmare, or maybe the remake. And Anthony, I don't know if you asked me to do this because you remember me saying that, or if it was just happened by happenstance, but whatever the case, thank you for inviting me to review this movie. I've been wanting a good shot to sit down and check it out again. New Nightmare, as I'm sure Anthony told you about, but I'll kind of break it down some more, takes place in our world, the real world, where Hollywood is planning on making another Nightmare on Elm Street film when the real Fred Krueger entity that the series was based off of starts to break into our real, tangible world and starts terrorizing the cast and crew of the new film. Being a 1994 movie, this was probably the first film that I ever saw that was meta. Well, not first, that would probably be Last Action Hero, but this movie is actually kind of similar to Last Action Hero. The only real difference was that that was an action comedy while this was horror, but both had movie characters breaking into the real world, and I'm a sucker for a good meta film. For some reason or another, that's where I kind of just let loose and don't grasp so tightly onto wanting a logically sound or technically great film. A movie can technically be garbage, but I could still love it, if it were meta. There's just something so unique and so special about this subcategory of film. There was an episode of Supernatural where the Winchester brothers also stepped into the real world onto the set of the TV show, and that remains one of my most favorite episodes of the show altogether, and I've seen all 15 years of the show. A big draw for this movie in particular was that it's kind of built around nostalgia. A lot of what happens in the movie in general is kind of gimmicky, definitely fan service, like bringing back fan favorites. Heather from the first couple of movies is in the movie. Robert Englund's in the movie as himself, Wes Craven's in there as himself, and one of the real producers of the film franchise is in there playing himself as well. And what's so neat about that is that even though the movie has some issues with, campiness and corniness, having all of these people kind of show up and play themselves still makes the movie stand out as one of the best Nightmare films. In fact, my original score for this movie had New Nightmare as either my favorite movie in general or second favorite under the original. I think it was original Nightmare, New Nightmare, and the remake Nightmare. In that order, because I actually really dig the remake, but that's another talk show for another day. I don't want to forget to mention that the use of red herrings in the film is really good. Like, they hone in on the concept of dreams versus reality so much in the movie that it's hard to fully understand if what you're seeing in this scene is real or not. And I feel like that's a really important distinction with the series as a whole. And if you can pull that off, you have something good on your hands. Another great thing to note here is the darker turn of Freddy Krueger himself. If you just start watching the series at this point, you probably won't even know how great it is to see that, because for years prior to this, Freddy was just getting more and more ridiculous, and by the last movie, he was essentially just a cartoon character. I remember almost nothing about the last movie in this franchise other than it's bad. So the darker turn is a huge breath of fresh air, but there are things in the movie that I feel like I have to mention that aren't good. New Nightmare, as interesting as it is still flawed. A breath of fresh air in comparison to the predecessors, to be sure, but on its own, the film is still crazy corny. One of the first things that you'll see in the movie in general is somebody chopping off their hand after building a new clawed Freddy glove. And then the glove stands up on its own and then runs around and starts attacking people like the Thing from Addams Family. As for the acting, I mean, Heather, it's nice to see her in the movie, but you guys have to believe me when I say that the girl cannot act. The movie gets overly dramatic way too fast, and she's going flipping pancakes crazy over everything, overacting every little thing that she runs into. To make things worse, the boy who plays her son in the film is essentially acting like the kid in The Shining, saying, "Annie isn't here, Mrs. Torrance." People may disagree with me on this, but I don't actually think that his character was all that necessary. Sure, he serves as the thing to protect Freddy from, but obviously Freddy breaking into the real world is the real threat. That's the thing that they should be focusing on, not this kid specifically. I don't know, this movie is definitely made for the fans, and anybody that has ever liked anything with Freddy Krueger will probably consider this film to be a hidden gem. That's why my technical score isn't really that high as it could be, but it's still decent at 76%. But it is definitely a biased thing. It's something that you're either going to love or hate. And for me, I'm lucky because I've always loved it, even with all the flaws it has. My bias score is 90%. Averaging out the two scores together, my end score is actually 83%, 83 out of 100 possible stars, or a B letter grade. Anthony, once again, man, thanks so much for having me on. I had a blast with this film, as I knew I would. I had forgotten some of the cornier things that had happened in the movie, but those things ultimately worked for what the film was going for. Anyways, guys, make sure that you subscribe to Anthony's channel, and until the next time we meet again, peace out!
A big thanks to David from Interpreting the Stars for being here in this video. As I said earlier, I did indeed ask you to be in this video due to the comment that you made in one of the earlier videos in this franchise. So I appreciate you being in this video, and I loved hearing your thoughts. I have to agree with you that the son in this is definitely kind of ripping on the whole Shining kid, as well as just, he's kind of an irrelevant part of the movie. Yeah, like you kind of like what you said. He's kind of the thing to protect Freddy from, but I don't really ever care about him when I think back on this movie. On an overall, I think that this movie just does a really good job of being this very meta approach to the franchise. It's very clever, and you can tell that Wes Craven was kind of testing his chops as far as the meta kind of approach to storytelling for what he would end up doing just a few years later with Scream. I really enjoy the way that this film is directed. I love seeing Heather Langenkamp back. I know that you mentioned that you're not a really big fan of her performance, and though I agree that her acting is a little bit over the top, I think that kind of just leans into what this franchise is a little bit. And since this movie does still have its toes kind of dipped in some cheese, I think that her performance kind of leans into that. I do really actually enjoy her as herself in this movie. I just enjoy her in this franchise. Heather Langenkamp, looking back at all of the movies after binging them, is easily my favorite protagonist of all of the films. And I just thoroughly enjoy her in this movie, playing herself, kind of having to figure things out. And I enjoy the approach to how they chose to tell the story of Freddy coming to the real world. And also, Freddy's makeup in this film is phenomenal. I know that Wes Craven says that he's not a huge fan of the redesign. Maybe they shouldn't have done that, but I love the redesign. It kind of differentiates him from the other films. I really enjoy the way he looks in this film. The new claw, the new glove, the way he looks, the burn marks. There's something far more evil and sinister about him in this film, and they do touch on that within the movie. Heather Langenkamp does mention that he does look more evil in this film, or when she sees him, he seems more evil than she remembered. So I love the idea of these people who worked on this film being chased by this demonic entity who was the character that was in the films. Even Robert Englund says that he starts to have some weird things happening to him. And so you do have Freddy Krueger coming into the movie, coming into the real world, played by Robert Englund, but Robert Englund is also in the film playing himself. And it may sound like that could not work, but it totally works. I think they do a great job of it. And I think there's definitely some shots with Freddy in this film that are just absolutely iconic. They have him looking creepy. There are moments that are genuinely creepy.
Miss me? Nancy, Freddy's dead.
And this isn't really something that's necessarily terrifying to me, but I enjoy the imagery, I enjoy the makeup, I enjoy Robert Englund's performance, and for the first time since maybe the third film, Freddy was actually creepy again and entertaining to watch, whereas in the fourth and fifth and sixth, he was like the one thing kind of saving those movies for me, but they really didn't give him much to do. Whereas in this film, though he's not in it for a whole lot until the very end of the film, I think the way that they used him was incredibly effective. I really enjoyed Robert Englund in the role, and this movie definitely just, I think, highlights why Robert Englund is just so great as Freddy. The finale of the film definitely leans into more of what we've seen in the earlier installments in the film, to bigger over-the-top moments. There's like this scene where Freddy's like face elongates and his jaw's all long and he's got his tongue sticking out. Very much in line with what we've seen in the previous films, a little bit more goofy compared to the rest of the film. But for the most part, I find this to be a really solid movie. But I can agree that I think that because of the fact that this film is going for such a meta approach and such a really unique approach to telling this story, There are some big swings that Wes Craven had in the story that I don't think all hit, but for the most part, I think majority of this film really is solid, and a lot of those big swings that he did take do work in favor of the film. So yeah, guys, that's going to be my thoughts on New Nightmare. Really love this movie. Definitely one of my favorites in the franchise. I kind of struggle with doing definite rankings at all. You know, it's part of why I don't really do any ranking videos here on the channel. But if I had to rank at least the first few in this franchise, or at least for me, I would say my favorite is probably the first one, with New Nightmare right behind it, then the third one, and then actually the remake, which may be blasphemy for some, and I know that David from Interpreting the Stars also agrees that I think that movie definitely gets a little bit more hate than it deserves compared to 4, 5, and 6. Even though those films have Robert Englund, who is the superior Freddy, I think that the remake is pretty solid. And oh, I guess if I go back, actually, I'll say that I think Freddy versus Jason is right above the remake for me. I really enjoy Freddy versus Jason, and I will be talking about that next. I think that's next. I'm very excited to do that. So yeah, guys, that's going to be the end of my thoughts on New Nightmare. Please go down below in the description box and give some love to David from Interpreting the Stars. Go subscribe to his channel. Go give him some love. Let him know I sent you. Hit that like button. Comment your thoughts. Comment your thoughts. Subscribe for more videos, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.